Viewer discretion advised. This video contains sensitive content that may be disturbing to some listeners. Please proceed with caution. Hello everyone. It's afternoon here in Los Angeles. My name is Emily, and I live near Los Angeles. I'll change the names in the story to avoid any problems since it's a sensitive subject. I'm sure you'll understand after hearing the context. It might be a bit long, but I want you to understand every detail and situation. It all started when I was 16. Now I'm 20. I remember it was the beginning of the pandemic, and the whole confinement was just starting. I was very active on social media. My sister and I did live broadcasts on Facebook, doing silly things. I used to accept friend requests from people I didn't know, and among them was David. I'll use this name to protect his identity. At that time, I didn't feel like a very attractive girl, and I had just ended a relationship. You know, those little teenage flings. David wrote to me saying that he knew me from the live broadcasts and that he thought I was a very pretty girl. He wanted to meet me. We talked for a few days and eventually met in person. A month later, we were already dating. During the first year of the relationship, he was very sweet. There were loving details, and my parents adored him because he was kind, helpful, and charismatic. But after that time, I began to notice changes. David started manipulating me, playing with my emotional security. I discovered messages with other women, and he hid things from me. Although he treated me well at first, I developed a fast and dangerous emotional attachment. We got to the point where if he did something wrong, I ended up being the one who apologized for his mistakes. It's embarrassing to admit, but one time I even tried to take my own life because I felt like I couldn't live without him. We would break up and get back together constantly. The relationship was very toxic. Over time, he showed his true colors. He was a person with a split personality. In front of my family, he was one thing, but in private, during fights, he would become violent and very aggressive. I remember one time we were walking down the street, and he pulled out a very sharp knife that I didn't even know he was carrying and tried to lunge at a guy. I calmed him down after a lot of effort, but it was terrifying. I thought he would really hurt someone. One time, I decided to break up with him for good. I resigned myself to the fact that he didn't love me anymore and stopped looking for him. A whole week went by without him speaking to me, and I was already coming to terms with the breakup. But to my surprise, he showed up at my house, begging me to talk. I complained to him about everything and told him what he needed to change. He promised me he would, and I gave him another chance. By then, I was 18 and had decided to live on my own. I changed schools and found a small apartment. It was actually the ground floor of a house where an old woman lived, very isolated from other houses. I got a job with flexible hours, thanks to David's help. He knew where I lived and even had a copy of the keys to come and go as he pleased. A serious mistake on my part. My new stage of life was an experience that made me realize how fragile the line is between safety and danger. My routine was very exhausting. Working, studying, and barely sleeping. Although I saw David daily at work, the problems weren't long in coming. He received many messages from women, which made me very angry. His constant outbursts of anger and my frustration with his behavior led to endless arguments. One day, I finally decided to break up with him. It seemed that he loved the idea because that way he could continue texting and going out with all the girls he wanted. For the next month, I noticed that he was calm. Sometimes he would beg me at work, make details for me, but I ignored him. What convinced me not to go back with him was his attitude. He flirted with all the new girls they hired at work. It was like nothing and no one escaped him, and he did everything in front of me. This confused and infuriated me. I decided to move on. I started talking to a guy from work who I thought was cute, but it hadn't gone beyond a greeting because he knew I was David's girlfriend. But now, without him, I no longer had those ties. One day, I found this guy from work on social media. We'll call him Rogelio. When he saw it was me, he accepted me immediately. I had only been single for a short time, like a month and a half, but that didn't matter to us, and we started getting to know each other. In a matter of a week, we went out almost daily. Rogelio was very nice to me, and I felt good around him. One day, he missed work because he was sick, so I decided not to work either, and we went out that afternoon. We spent a few hours together, went for coffee, and everything was going well. However, it was already very late, so he offered to drive me home because the road was somewhat dangerous and dark. The lady who rented to me had gone on vacation, so my apartment was completely empty. When I got home, we were at the gate saying goodbye. Our relationship was somewhat hidden to avoid rumors at work, since we didn't want them to think that I had left David for Rogelio. No one knew anything about it. Suddenly, we saw a truck arrive, and David got out of it furiously. Apparently, he was going to see me to talk, but he discovered us and found out that we were dating. I can swear I never thought what I'm about to tell you would happen. David stormed into my apartment. I asked Rogelio to leave, saying I would take care of it, but he didn't want to leave me alone at that moment. David came out of my house with 2 knives from my kitchen, threatening Rogelio. He argued that they were friends while we were arguing. David ran after Rogelio and closed the apartment gate. Nobody could see what was happening. Immediately after that, he tried to force me into the apartment. It was then that I completely disowned him. The entrance to the apartment was the embassy, and for the first time, he hit me on the back. I stumbled and fell to the ground. He started kicking me in the head. Only the words echoed seriously. "This is happening to me." David started hitting me while I was in shock. Then he picked me up, grabbing me by the hair, and with a knife in his hand, he placed it on my neck, saying, "See what you're causing. All of this is your fault." I thought he was really going to cut my throat, but at that moment my only witness arrived, our boss from work. He confronted him and demanded that he let me go, warning him not to get involved anymore. Finally, they took him away by force. Rogelio returned after everything had happened. He didn't get to see anything. I was in a sea of tears, and Rogelio dedicated himself to protecting me after that traumatic experience. I didn't want to report it. I didn't want to know anything about David or his family. His level of manipulation was such that when I told my family that he had violated me, they didn't believe me. I felt completely unprotected, and my only support was Rogelio. Because of this situation, I lost my job. However, Rogelio did not allow me to drop out of school. He helped me financially and was always by my side. I stopped seeing David, but every time I ran into him on the streets of the municipality, my hands would start to shake, and I felt like he was going to jump on me. Luckily, nothing ever happened. Months went by, and I was still in a relationship with Rogelio. Since he kept his job, he would come and tell me what was happening with David. I found out that David had a girlfriend, and then they started living together. But here's the thing, the harassment began. As the months went by, I began to receive screenshots and threatening messages from David, telling me to leave him alone because if I didn't, he would take action against me. But the thing is, I didn't know who was talking to me. To give you a little context, David's partner, whom we'll call Estella, had a son, and she claimed that I was sending prejudiced messages about David to her son's father. Therefore, I would not let him see his son anymore. They insinuated that I induced David's teenage sister to leave the home. I harassed and bombarded David's parents with messages saying that their son was a drug addict and abusive, countless things that I would never dare to do. The straw that broke the camel's back was when they showed my current partner messages in which I supposedly said, from a fake profile, that I manipulated and treated Rogelio however I wanted and that he did what I wanted. That angered me too much, and I decided to send David messages in which I told him to leave me alone and that I was not the perpetrator of all that. We got into a horrendous fight over messages, so he went to report me. I was trembling on the day of the hearing since the accusations he was making against me were serious. They made us sign an agreement in which I would no longer mention his name, nor would he mention mine. Nor could he approach me, nor could I approach him. They warned me that if I continued with that, it would escalate into something bigger. I knew that I was not the author of it, so I was calm. More months passed, and I found out that David had violated Estella at work. Everyone saw it, but she didn't walk away from him. As soon as I found out, my blood boiled because women are not to be touched. Sincerely, I sent a message to Estella, showing my support and encouraging her to report him and not to make the same mistake as me. But she just ignored me, I continued with my normal life, and a few months later, I received a message from Estella, in which she asked me to tell her about my experience with David. Sincerely, that surprised me since I had only received negative responses from her. I told her everything, and apparently, she approached me because he had violated her again and was already starting to be unfaithful. In confidence, she told me that she wanted to apologize since she had found out who was the person who sent all those hate messages towards them. She told me that it was a sister of her ex-partner since they had tracked the fake account and knew where the father of her child lived. It made me so angry to know that in front of many people, I looked like the crazy, unfaithful one, and he looked like the victim. I can only say that everything falls by its own weight in the end. They found out who was the one who caused everything, and he really was a violent person. David and Estella are still together. I ended my relationship with Rogelio, although we still see each other frequently. Every now and then we see them and they just look at us. That was my story. It's too long, but believe me, it's worth listening to. I thank you for reading it, and I hope that the women who listen to this find it useful to protect themselves from people like David. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe the channel for future videos, and like and share with your friends. Hello everyone. It's morning here in Sydney. My name is Cecilia, and I'm currently 16 years old. But the beginning of this story dates back to when I was 4 or 5 years old. I want to warn you that this story has somewhat sensitive content. I'll try to keep it with simple but understandable language since I understand that there are people who are quite sensitive regarding this subject. I also warn you that this story is somewhat extensive since I don't want to leave out any details except the most explicit. I'm going to change my name and that of my stalker since I have no doubt that he follows this channel. Or if by chance he finds it now, finally, let's go there. I was always an outcast, not because of my tastes or personality. I was pretty normal. I liked to play, sing, and draw like any little girl. But my classmates always saw me as a weirdo because I was taller and more overweight than the other girls. Ever since I was little, I had big problems with my self-esteem, and I remember that I always came home crying because they bothered me at school. I always found myself wondering why I wasn't as pretty as the other girls in my class. Now, this is where he comes in. During that time, he went to the same elementary school as me. He was 6 years and a half older. From time to time, when he noticed that someone was bothering me, he would go to my living room and defend me. Sometimes he would give me candy and hug me. He would say that they were lying, that in reality I was very pretty, and that if someone else bothered me, I should tell them immediately. This boy was my cousin, Angel. You could say that he was one of the most important people to me. He was almost always at my house or I was at his, since my mom and my aunt were very close and visited each other constantly. I grew very fond of him, and that is probably what hurts me the most of all, how much I loved him. He was like the older brother that I never had but that I needed. I don't know when or how it started. I only know that I was 4 years old. Since that age, I used to play with the SpongeBob mattresses on my bed, where I played with my friends and cousins from time to time, and it's where he almost always spent time. At 11 years old, he had begun to become curious about certain topics, and I, being within his reach, was almost always the one who paid for it. Neither my mother nor my aunt noticed anything strange. They normalized that behavior visualized from Angel just because he was a man. They didn't care that he watched adult videos on his computer or made sexual comments during family gatherings. They ignored it all, and that's what shocks me the most. Why would you leave a child who clearly displays behavior like that alone with a 4-year-old girl? I won't be too specific, but from the age of 4 to 11, I suffered a great deal of abuse from him. He didn't stop at touching. He would manipulate me into doing disgusting things that I couldn't tell anyone about. At first, I normalized it. I was never scared because how can I be scared of something that I got used to from such a young age? However, the more I grew, the more uncomfortable it made me every time he tried to do it. I started to avoid him, and in a way, the abuse stopped for a bit, but it always happened again eventually. This only completely stopped when my aunt died, and our families stopped being so close. At that time, I was uncomfortable with his presence, but I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't afraid of him because he didn't seem like the kind of person who would hurt me. He was still kind and protective of me, and always, every time I remembered the things he did to me, I would tell myself that it was just his immaturity and that I was partly to blame. I thought that he had changed and that he wouldn't dare do something like that again, but I was wrong. At 13, I developed an addiction to social media since that's where I used to take refuge with my online friends. Like I said, since I was a child, I suffered bullying, and it followed me until high school. In my house, there was no internet, and my aunt had a modem in her house. So my mom would take me to connect from time to time. The times this happened, Angel would behave strangely around me. I don't mean that he would behave like a jerk or touch me secretly. No, he would literally stand in the corner of the room where I was and start touching himself, pretending he didn't see me. Those situations were very uncomfortable, but I could never ever tell my mom because I was afraid that she would blame me, especially for not telling her about the abuse when it was happening. At 14, I remember I started to really like a game that was in the fandom, but I wouldn't play it because my phone couldn't handle it. One day, I mentioned it to a friend while he was present, and she immediately offered to download it for me on his phone. I thought he would forget, but the next day he came to my house with the game installed. I still remember Angel's words, "Don't worry, Cecilia. Whenever you want, you can come play it at my house." It was an innocent comment, but at the time it made my blood run cold. A month before my 15th birthday, my mom sent me to his house so he could accompany me to his wife's sister's house, who did manicures and stuff. I flatly refused, but when she started questioning me, why didn't I want to be there? I had to give in. When I arrived, he was in his underwear. I greeted him awkwardly and sat down in one of the rocking chairs that were left in front of an old television that was in the living room. I took out my cell phone and headphones to chat with my best friend on WhatsApp while listening to music. Anything to forget that he was there. There came a moment when I looked up for a second and froze. When I looked at the reflection in the blacked-out screen of the television, Angel was behind me doing it again while pretending to watch something on his cell phone. At that moment, I felt terrified. Thank God, nothing happened, and he eventually stopped, but I still remember the fear I experienced, the way the memories flashed through my mind, and the horror that he would try to do it again. I had never been so scared in my life. After that day, I started avoiding him completely, but Angel kept showing up at my house more frequently, almost every day. When my birthday finally came, my paternal grandmother gave me a guitar. He was experienced with the instrument, so he was always insisting that I go to his house to teach me. These behaviors didn't stop until one day he left the country, and since then, he hasn't returned. The last I heard from him was when, on my last birthday, he wrote to me, "Happy birthday, Cecilia. I hope to see you again soon." I blocked him immediately. I didn't want to hear from him again, and that's how my story ends. I really hope this is where it ends. A few days ago, he wrote to my mom, saying he wants to come back for my grandma's birthday. That day is getting closer, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. From this story, I take away a very important point. This would never have happened if my aunt had been more responsible, if my parents hadn't preferred to leave me alone instead of taking care of me. I would have forgiven him if he had stopped at some point. 11 years old is a young age where children are very stupid, but he never stopped. Not even when he was 11 or 12 or 16 or 18 or 21. Ever. It wasn't immaturity, he was sick. I know my story isn't that strong about bullying compared to others, but this situation seriously screwed me up a lot. Thank you so much for reading me. Have a good day. Good evening. I would like to keep this story anonymous since, in a way, this stalker is still close to me. You can call me Olivia. I'm from Spain, and now I'm 18 years old. But this story happened when I was 17. It all started in December, shortly after breaking up with my ex-partner after 2.5 years of relationship. On Christmas Day, I uploaded a story on Instagram dressed as Santa Claus. I noticed that one of my ex-partner's friends, who we'll call Javier, commented on it. At first, it was just a normal conversation between friends, but we continued talking regularly. For a month, on January 31st, we kissed and started a casual relationship. I wasn't ready for anything serious, and I told him so. At first, he accepted it, but after a month, he confessed that he had fallen in love with me and wanted something more formal. I refused because, although I liked him, I hadn't gotten over my ex. He kept insisting, and in the end, I decided to tell him the truth. I was still in love with my ex, and I didn't see a relationship with him as possible. Initially, he said he would be patient and wait for me, but I made it clear to him that it wasn't likely to happen. I tried to get back with my ex, but things didn't work out. I decided to forget him and started a casual relationship with another boy from my high school. Javier, who also attended my high school, found out quickly. He then wrote to this boy to threaten to fight him for me, which forced me to talk to him again to stop the situation. The conversation escalated, and he ended up threatening to publish intimate photos and videos if I didn't get back with him. For some reason, Javier decided to write to my best friend, who he had never tried to vent and insult me by saying horrible things about me. My friend took screenshots and collected evidence in a folder. We used them to threaten him with a complaint so he would stop behaving that way. With the support of some friends, I spoke to him because I was afraid to confront him alone. We told him that we had evidence of what he was doing and that since I was a minor and he was older, he could face serious legal consequences. Finally, he agreed to delete the photos in front of me. Unfortunately, this did not end there. Since we attended the same school, I had to see him every day. He was in charge of making me feel uncomfortable by staring at me in the hallways or sneaking into my classes. He also wrote to me again, threatening to kill himself if I didn't return to him. Meanwhile, he defamed me on social media, and my life at school became hell. In the end, I told my parents everything. They talked to him, and that stopped the threats. However, months later, in August, I found out that some supposed friends were informing him about my life at his request. He also continued to threaten the boy I was with. I decided to cut ties with those friends, and since then, I haven't heard from him again. Although now he's dating one of those girls who is still close to acquaintances of mine, so I don't think I'll have problems with him again. Thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry for the length, but I hope that my story serves as support to those who are going through something similar.